Guten Tag. Welcome to tonight's Shir, Motzei Shabbos, Parshas Truma. Today's Shir is dedicated by Shpachas Rabin of Edgware in memory of Reb Moshe Verborche Olav Sholem, who passed away Dalad Ador Tovshin Lamed Gimel. So today was his Yortzeit, and also in Zecher of Reb Chaim Shmuel Mendel, otherwise known as Michael Rabin, whose second Yortzeit is this week. May there be Melitza Yosher for the families and for us all. I'm meant to be starting with my Chassidish Amaisa, yeah? These are the new rules. Okay, fine. So I heard a Maisa like this. At one time, someone came to Tzemach Tzedek and asked him for a Haskoma on his Sefer. So the Sefer was still in manuscript, and he presents the Sefer, and the Tzemach Tzedek starts leafing through. And you forgive me if I say in Yiddish, he says, fragt und antwortet. Turns the pages, fragt und antwortet, is asking, is answering. And as the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek is leafing through, fragt und antwortet, so his ego is plummeting. And so ultimately he blurts out, aber Rebbe, but that's what Tosfos do. Tosfos says, im Jaiman yesh leima. So what's so insignificant about Frecht and Enfert? So the Rebbe said the following: when Tosfos asks a kasha, and then you take a Rashba, whatever, other Rishonim, you see that they ask the kasha differently. So why did Tosfos ask this kasha? And then you get a whole pilpul. Tosfos didn't ask this way because that way wasn't his problem, it didn't disturb him. It was this way which he had a problem. So he asked the kasha the way he did. And then Tosfos gives an answer. And then you see the Rashba or in the Iran or wherever, they give a different answer. No. So why did Tosfos give this answer and not that answer? And whether Rashba, you know why? Because you're going to go deeper. You know that Tosfos doesn't agree with the Rashba's answer. That's why he gave his answer, because the answer of Tosfos of the Rashba it doesn't fit with him. Okay. So therefore, when the in time of Tosfos is not just this question; it's the whole world around it. And when Tosfos gives an answer, it's not just what he says. There's a whole development around it, which you can a deeper understanding in the sugya. When you ask a kasha and I ask, why did he ask the question this way, not the other way? And why did he answer the question this way and didn't answer the next question a different way? Well, mir nicht eingefallen anders. It didn't occur to him to ask the question differently. It didn't occur to him to answer differently. All right, so therefore it's just reflecting the effort. It's just a simple, very narrow question and simple, narrow answer. This is the Tzemach Tzedek's answer to this young man budding scholar. Kitzer. So I hope that some of the questions here will be a bit more just reflect and geantwortet. That's my hakdama today. Okay. So the first thing we have is the following: that in Tovshin base approximately, it's the Frierdiker Rebbe. This is told over by Reb Leibel Posner. Oliver Sholem passed away just recently, probably well into his 90s. And he said that in the year Tovshin base, might be later, the Frierdiker Rebbe had Yortzeit for his mother, and he said Haftarah. Now, as is known, in those years, very few Anash lived in Crown Heights. The Anash lived more in Brownsville, which is another half an hour down the road. I'm walking. And who davened 770? Some local Balabatim who were. And so when the Rebbe is saying the Haftarah, it sounds like there were some other people who are also saying Haftarah along with him. And one time, the Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe, sends down Beryl Chaskin to announce in the shul the following: Hafteire davon Herren. Sagen Hafteire is a minig beides. Eben will mitsagen, soll man sagen, stilleheit. Hafteire is something to listen to. To say the Hafteire aloud. Well, he changes the wording, yeah? Sagen Hafteire, and he adds about Bakel. To say the Hafteire aloud is a minig of, is an ignorant minig. If you want to say with, say it quietly. So this was, so now let's look into the background of this issue. Should the people be saying Haftorah with the Balkoire, but the Maftir or not? So let's come back to the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, Siman Reish Pei Dalet, and it starts off the following: Lo yaschel hamaftir lahaftir. The one reading the Haftorah should not begin. That means not begin saying the brachos, I assume, until the Goylel has finished wrapping the Sefer Torah, in order that the Goylel should also be able to pay attention to the Haftorah, because it's a choivo, it's a duty for everyone to listen to the Haftorah, to hear the Haftorah. So that's the first thing, because everyone has to hear the Haftorah. So wait with don't start until Mr. Galila is done. Second point is, therefore, lo yikru shnayim, you shouldn't have two people reading the Haftorah together, aloud, because you can't hear two voices. I had someone asking me just this week whether he could do that. He's got whether it's in Russia, whatever it was, somewhere where the people are not very not knowledgeable. Could he be translating the Haftorah, or was it Megillah, as they're going? I think it was Haftorah. Could they translate the Haftorah as they go along? So I told him, instead of doing that, have 3 psukim, then translate, as it was in the time of the Gemara. They had the Turgaman. I mean, I understand his problem, that if you're going to have a long stretch and people don't understand what's going on, they're just going to be talking. And that's not very helpful for running a show. But all right, so you do the 3 psukim in Hebrew, then in translation, let's explain what's going on, but not two together, because shnei kolos ein nishmoim, which, if I may just throw in, I've heard of some places that on Yom Neiroim they have a chazan doing the avoid or whatever, and at the same time someone is talking in English about whatever is going about Yom Kippur, Heilige Sachen. But I find it very strange to have 2 voices speaking at the same time. You can't hear 2 voices at the same time. And therefore, you shouldn't. Now, okay, so then, so far it looks like just one person says the Haftorah and everyone listens. Which usually is the code for Alpi Kabbalah, not to rely on listening, but everyone reads the Haftorah. They hear the brachas from the maftir, but they should be reading, shouldn't read aloud, but rather quietly, word for word with the maftir. So this is what the Alter Rebbe presents it, that Haftorah should be primarily said by the maftir, by the leader, and there are those who say along quietly. Now, if you go to a Polish shtibel, which I only was exposed to during COVID, everyone says it quietly. There's no one saying the Haftorah aloud. It's just that he says the brachas, Mr. Maftir, and then everyone just murmurs it along, and that's clearly not what we're saying over here. And I'm assuming that those Yidden in 770 back in Topshin base came from such a background where Haftorah was said everyone together, and that's the Frierdiker Rebbe is saying. It's the minig bodas. So the following quote we have is from the Shari Ephraim, sefer dedicated to Kriyas Torah, and interestingly, this is quoted almost word for word by the Mishnah Brura in the Biur Halacha, also in Siman Reish Pei Dalet. He says the main thing is that the maftir is alone in reading the Haftorah. And then he says, let's see, but say quietly, Bimdino Seinu. It's become common that everyone is saying the Haftorah aloud, B'Koil Rom, and something about he waits for the last posuk. V'yedze minig vosikin. This is not an eminent minig, rather it's a michsor in yediyah. He says it's an minig of ignorance, and it should be annulled.
From ignorant to ignorant for.
So this is where it's coming from. Now, so we have here three possibilities. We have here this Polish minig of everyone saying together, which seems to be quite problematic in halacha. We have the minig of one saying the Haftarah and everyone listening. And then you have the middle option, which is one says the Haftarah and everyone is saying along quietly. So which is our minig? So I have written about this, and that's why someone brought this to my attention. But here is a sicha from Tafshin Lamed Zayin. As you can see, I think Sachin Shal Pesach. The Haftorah talks about the Geula Hasidah. The Haftorah is shaykh to everyone. Either he himself says the Haftorah with a bracha before or after, or he's listening to someone else and he's saying Amen. And then he says, Yadav B'Yechidus, then you're saying the Haftorah on your own. So you're seeing here, and there's other places where, and so actually Reb Chaim Noah writes that when he lived in Eretz Yisrael primarily, but he visited Lubavitch for a little while, and he says the minig there was the Rebbe says Haftarah, and no one says it, and no one else says it. So you just listen to the Rebbe, and so it seems that Chassidim by the Rebbe, they themselves they wouldn't say the Haftarah, just listen to the Rebbe. I gave this over on the Wednesday night in Hebrew, and someone sent me a message that he had heard that in Simchas Torah, so the Rebbe did not have maftir Simchas Torah morning because he had Chosim Bereshis, so he didn't have maftir. You don't have two aliyahs in the same day in different Sifrei Torah. It's a problem. Let's not get into that. But meanwhile, the Rebbe did not have maftir. So Rabbi Chadakov used to have maftir on Yom Kippur morning, and I think also Simchas Torah. I don't remember. At any rate, so they told me that the Rebbe also, when someone else said the Haftarah, he didn't mouth the Haftarah with, he just listened. So it looks like the minhag of the Rebbe was just to listen to the Haftarah and not to say it along with the maftir. Okay. I mean, the way I was brought up is that we do say it quietly with the maftir. Okay. Fine. So now we've got the second question is that a particular shul did not have a minyan last Shabbos, which was Parshas Shkolim. And so the question was, could he do Parshas Shkolim on Parshas this morning? Could he have done Parshas Shkolim? After all, the Parshas Shkolim is to remind people to bring the half shekel in time for Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So if you didn't manage to do it, the primary time is either on if Shabbos Rosh Chodesh or Shabbos Mevorchim. Didn't manage to do it then. Could you do it in this Shabbos, which was what we call a Hafsokah? And so this is discussed in great length. There's a sefer called Shalos Tshuvas Ginas Veradim, not the one from the Gipri Megodim, but from a Svardische Goen. And he goes through and he says the following. If someone missed a Kriyas HaTorah, if a community missed Kriyas HaTorah, let's say last week was Parshas Mishpatim, so then it does say in Shulchan Aruch, etc., that for Parshas Truma, they can do the whole of Mishpatim. So it means for the Kohen, they call up the Kohen and read the whole of Mishpatim, and then Rishon of Truma, and then till Sheni, and so the Kohen has a very long Aliyah. And then they continue. That's what's written in Shulchan Aruch, what you should do if you missed last week. So you do see that you can make up. If you missed last week Haftarah, you could make up this coming week. But if you missed, let's say, on a Yom Tov, for some reason you didn't have a minyan for on one day of Yom Tov, Loyal eladas. No one's going to suggest, oh, let's do next Shabbos. Let's make up what we missed on Yom Tov. This everyone will understand that over zmanoi bottle carbona. You missed the opportunity to. You can't make it up later. Why? Because it's not Yom Tov. You can't do it then. So here's the question: Is why is Shabbos you can do next week and Yom Tov you can't do next week? So this Sefer Ginas Veradim comes up with a very interesting explanation. The Sedre Mishpatim is not so tightly tied to this day. And Parshas Truma is not so tied to this Shabbos either. The proof to this is, as the Rambam says, there were those communities who used to do the Torah in a 3-year cycle. If they're using a 3-year cycle, so then they're not going to keep to Parshas Truma and Parshas Truma. They're going to be wherever they are, but it's not going to be it's not limited to that week. Therefore, there's a certain flexibility. If you didn't manage to do the Kriyas HaTorah last Parshas Mishpatim, it also belongs to Parshas. You can read on Parshas Truma. You can read Mishpatim or Parshas Truma also. You can make it up. It's not as if it's a lost case. Yom Tov, we understand. There's a time when it's Yom Tov. To do it after Yom Tov is irrelevant. Parshas Shkolim and all the 4 parashas will fall into the Yom Tov category. They have been designated designed by Chazal, at whatever time it was, to be read on these 4 Shabbosim in the other time leading up to Pesach. They have been designated to specific Shabbosim, and once that opportunity is passed, it's Avos Manoi. Even though the Svora might be, it could be, and so he says you can't do it. This is the Ishkinas Veradim. Hashgocha Protis. I got a call from a shpocha of mine, shliach somewhere in the United States, and he says, this Shabbos he will have a minyan. Shabbos Zocher he won't have a minyan. Can he do Shabbos Zocher this week? It's the same question. And I told him, based upon this Ginas Veradim, the psak was no, you can't do it. Because it's being the Chazal have given set times for the Arba Parshas, and so you can't do it when you want. All right, so that was interesting. Right, so here comes question number 3, and that is about Machzis HaShekel. So there's a minhag to give extra tzedakah, specifically in a half shekel amount, according to your local currency. And I'm not going to go into all of that. 3 coins, and there's a minhag to give for each member of the family. That's a minhag Chabad. And so now, in this on the screen, it has from Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. So it says the following: Im koton is potter. A child is exempt from giving Machzis HaShekel. So our Machzis HaShekel is what we call Zeichel Machzis HaShekel. It's not going to the Beis HaMikdash, etc. It's going to Tzedakah. Okay, it's in commemoration. A child is potter. If his father is given for the child once, Chayev Le'olam. His father is Chayev to give a half shekel for this son forever. The Lashon of the Magen Avraham earlier, it says, Einei Poisek. So the question is, what do you mean Le'olam? If I've given, Baruch Hashem, I have a few boys, they've grown up, married, Baruch Hashem. Do I still have to give a half shekel for my sons because they once gave a half shekel? So I said, no, that's not the pshat. It means until they are of age and they're giving their own half shekel. But once they're giving their half shekel, you don't have to give it for them. But I needed to have a mocker. So I looked around, and Baruch Hashem, they to help, that this is the Rambam in Mishnayos Shkolim. Because in Rambam in Mishnah Torah, he says, Einei Poisek. Here he writes, and here's a child. So we'd say to the father, since you gave on behalf of your son last year. Interesting lashon. You kind of imposed this mitzvah on your son Taina love Tomid Yagdil. Continue giving Yagdil until he becomes of age. And don't stop until he grows, so he comes of age. So here it's clear, although it's poshet in Seichel, but it's nice to have a solid source. Yagdil. That's when you can, and then you give it over to him and says Achrayas. By the way, I'm seeing here also a very interesting Loshen in the Rambam, which I didn't think about before. When you've got voluntary mitzvahs, and there's always this question, the Rambam says a woman can't say a brocha leishe basukha. It's not her mitzvah. It's not, she doesn't have a tzivui. Tosfos says you can. So Ashkenazim say a woman can make a brocha on a shofar, sukkah, lulav. Good. What's the gather of a voluntary mitzvah? So I had this svara imagination. There is a room called a mitzvah. I don't have to go in there, but if I go, I'm doing a mitzvah. Yeah, I'll tell you where it becomes interesting. You know that there's a din that a sukkah has got a kedusha. That Hashem shechol shem shemayim ala kodshim, chol shem shemayim ala sukkah. The sukkah has got a kedusha. Once someone has used the sukkah, it's got a kedusha. You mustn't use it for anything else until after sukkahs. So my shaila is, what if there's a sukkah which a man hasn't used, only a woman used? Does that sukkah acquire a kedusha? Here's the question: is it just a voluntary? Is it voluntary mitchila vad soif, or no? Does it become a mitzvah? She didn't have to. When she does it, it becomes a mitzvah, and therefore chal shem shemayim ala sukkah. So here's the lashon: you say that a child doesn't have to give a half a shekel. V'hamadet olov zois ha-mitzvah. You kind of place the mitzvah on the child. All right, you can lavdavka shtaka mashmos, but I see this word. You've applied. It's voluntary, but you've chosen to apply it. Therefore, keep on doing it next year also. Fine. Let's move to the next question. I don't have a slide for that, and that is: does a walk-in fridge need to have a mezuzah? Now, let's say the fridge is Daled Ames square, quite a large fridge. It's unlikely to be in a private house, but an institution, yes, a yeshiva would likely have such a large fridge. So does such a fridge need to have a mezuzah? So what's the argument against? Well, it's not really livable. Even super cool people don't like to live in fridges. So it's not livable. He says should be part of mimnumsus. So some say, well, you can switch off the power and it will be livable. But there's another svara. I mean, that's not what it's designed. Designed as a fridge. It's being used as a fridge. Here's another svara. There is this idea that a room, locha is, that a bayis which is less than dal is potem in hamezuzah. So on the margin in Hilchas Mezuzah, a Piskei Tshuva quotes from a sefer called Chamudei Doniel. Chamudei Doniel says the exemption of a small room from having to have a mezuzah is talking it's a freestanding structure. You have a shed, which is, or you have a booth. You have your, let's say you are one of these tiny houses, which is, but just less than dalet, and you manage to put in a bed, but not much more. So you have this little booth, bottom in a mezuzah. But if you have a house which is a normal house, a livable house, and it's got a room coming off it, well then that room is part of a larger building, and therefore it's chayav mezuzah. It's a pesach which is part of a structure which is chayav mezuzah. So that door also needs to have mezuzah. The exemptions only would be if that's the entire structure which we're talking about. But if it's part of a larger house, so it's a pesach of a building which has dal. So you're seeing that a room like a walk-in larder, a walk-in wardrobe. So Chamudei Doniel needs to have a mezuzah, even if it doesn't have dal for amas. So the same argument now goes to the fridge. Never mind that it's not livable in the fridge. No one lives in the wardrobe either. But it is a room, which is a facility of a house, which is chayiv b'mezuzah. So that door is also chayiv b'mezuzah. So that's another argument why a walk-in fridge should have a mezuzah. So the advice given in the Malachtim is to put up a mezuzah but without a broch. I'm going to just look at this couple of points on the chat. Someone is saying it was very difficult to hear the Haftorah when the Rebbe said the Haftorah. That's true. Yeah. All right, we're going to move on. So I was at a simcha the past Sunday. It was a bar mitzvah in Birmingham area, and I was sitting next to my brother-in-law, Rabbi Yossi Alperovich, who has had the great schus to publish so far 11 volumes of Oir HaTfilah, which is a collection of all Mamorim, etc., from Chabad sources, going through the davening, and his 11th volume has covered, I think, the Shema, or the brachas after Shema, and now he's working on the next volume, which is going to be focusing on Shemona Esra. And so he said, I started at the end, where we say the psukim. And they say when we at the end of Shemona Esra, we say a pasuk for ourselves. We say a pasuk with the Rebbe's name. So the Rebbe's pasuk is Ma'or Einayim Yisamach Lev, yeah, of Shmua Tofet Dashan Otsem. So the Ma'or Einayim, the light of giving light to the eyes. So this brought him to this letter of the Rebbe. So it's a letter in Ikras Kodesh. As you could see, it's from Tofshin Tes Zayin, and it opens with Brocha V'Shalom. Now, when the Rebbe writes to usually it starts off Shalom or Bracha. But when it's a letter to a woman, then the Rebbe starts off Bracha V'Shalom, because there's something about not to be Makdim Shalom to a Isha, and therefore the Rebbe switches to Bracha V'Shalom, first Bracha and then Shalom. And that's where he kind of dealt with that issue. Okay, so he writes Bracha V'Shalom. I'm going to go straight into English. I'm endorsing or I'm confirming the receipt of your letter with the enclosed, and at a auspicious moment I will mention you by the gravesite or the holy gravesite of my father-in-law, the Rebbe, for improvement in health. Probably you do listen to, or you do hear Kiddush and Havdalah, and you taste from the wine of the Kiddush. And according to Midig Yisrael, you dip in your finger in the wine, which is remains of the Havdalah, and you touch it to your eyes. Obviously, that means to the outside of the eyes. As is mentioned in Sfarim, that this is a segula, that for improvement of the, he says, Ma'or Einov Shel Adam, to the light of the eyes of the person, and you translate that into Yiddish. Zum Augenschein von Menschen. Not shame, but shine, yeah, to the gleam of the eyes. And Hashem Yisborach should give you hatzlacha. Look, I'm guessing that the woman had a problem with her eyesight, and the Rebbe is giving her the advice that she should dip her fingers in. She should be careful with this minhag of dipping your fingers in the Havdalah wine and putting it in your eyes, but not in the eyes, but on the eyes. I guess so that needed to be clarified in her case. Okay, so then he was surprised to see this, because I don't know we don't know how widespread it is. Men do this. It's not so widespread that women should do it, but it's a fairly clear thing from the Rebbe that he's telling this woman to do it. Yeah. I know that in some places women will refrain from putting out their hands to look at the nails by the Havdalah candle. They might see that as a tznius to avoid doing so, especially when there's other men around. But here afterwards, to dip your fingers in the wine and put it on your eyes. So it's for women as well as for men, which is interesting. Okay, we're going to go on now to Kiddush Levana. So here is the question when it comes to Kiddush Levana, and it says you should face Mizrach. Does that mean, so what happens if you are another part of the world? Let's say if you are in Moscow, you want to daven towards Yerushalayim, you have to face south. And if you're in Australia, you should be davening northwest. For that matter, if you're in Beersheba, you should also be davening north, and you're in Tzfat, you should be davening south. So when it comes to Kiddush Levana, is it facing Mizrach to the east, or is it facing Yerushalayim? That's the question. Now, it's interesting that this idea of facing Mizrach has its source in a sefer called Yesod V'Shoresh HaAvodah, which was he was a little bit before the Alter Rebbe, I believe. But so my understanding is that this is actually, it doesn't mean Mizrach Dafka, it means towards Yerushalayim. And the point is, when you're saying Kiddush Levana, it's like a Makabel Pnei Shechina, and for that reason, you should be facing Yerushalayim as you would in Shemona Esrei. Now, the wording on the top here is from the Alter Rebbe Siddur. Ye'asher Raglov, which means have your feet straight or put together, and look at the moon once before saying the bracha, and then whilst you're reciting the bracha, you shouldn't be seeing the moon. So going back to Tov Shin Mem Aleph, I was in Melbourne, Shliach, and that was when we had Birchas HaChamo. And when in leading up to Birchas HaChamo was published a list of guidelines, and it said there they based the guidelines partly on the guidelines for Kiddush Levana. So they wrote the Ya'asher Raglov, and you should look at the sun before saying the bracha, which is okay. And so one character who wasn't so complimentary to Lubavitch, he saw this lashon Ya'asher Raglov. He says, does that mean you have to make your feet happy? Because the word Ya'asher is lashon Ashrei. So you make your feet happy. He was like a little bit mocking. So I was vexed by that and started looking into it. And so actually there is a lashon in the Sefer Migdal Oz. So I'm sure Monshe brings their story with the Tzemach Tzedek, and in davening in Tisborech, Lo Netzach, in Birchas Krishma, we say, V'asher Meshorsov Kulom Oimdim. And the Tzemach Tzedek said something, a drush on the words V'asher Meshorsov. V'asher is Meloshen Tomoich Ashuroi B'magloi Secho, which means the Loshen of the word Tomoich Ashuroi means support my feet in your paths. And so they asked him, why is he bringing from the word Asher Meshorsov when it says Kulam Oimdim? So he said, Tzedek explained that the Kulam Oimdim means they're standing, but not necessarily so firm. But when it says Asher Meshorsov, Tomech Ashur B'maglosecho means standing firm. So there is a certain mile in using the word Ya'asher Raglov. It's loshen of Tomech, as loshen of feet. The Asher means holding the 2 feet as if they were 1 foot. That's the meaning. Now, in the Shulchan Aruch, in Simon Tov Chavov, actually has Yasher Raglov. Well, the Alter Rebbe changed it. It's Al Derech Haremes to this Inyan of Tomech Ashur B'maglosecha. Let's move on. Right. So here was a case that the Chazan actually, it was after Musaf on Rosh Chodesh, and the Chazan said Chatzi Kaddish, and then they continued with Kaveh. I think half the people there were asleep, actually. How did you get away with it? How did you get away with saying half a Kaddish and then no one says a word, and then later, oh, we did only said half Kaddish. Okay. At any rate, so asking the question, what do they do to correct this? So the answer is, this Sefer, you can see I've referred to Sefer Shkias B'Yovin, which has By the way, I keep this sefer right next to my place in shul. This scares me of these mistakes. I have another copy at home, but some swearing you need to have handy. So the Shkias Miyovin deals with this question, something very similar, and he said that okay, in this Kaddish, if it didn't say Tiskabel Shlosim, Tiskabel Shlosim means the our prayers be accepted, or their prayers be accepted. Okay, so then the one who's saying Kaddish after Kaveh or after Oleinu, which normally would not say Tiskabel Shlosim, so put it Tiskabel Shlosim over there. After Shemon Esrei, you say Tiskabel Shlosim. After other forms of prayer, you don't say it. You missed it out there, so say Tiskabel Shlosim later. Now, it could be the one who's saying the Chazan who's down Musaf, and the one who's saying Kaddish after Alein is not the same person. But so what? It's for the Tzibur. He's saying when really Kaddish is said on behalf of the Tzibur. So he's saying Tiskabel Shlosim, may this tefillah be accepted. And he's saying on behalf of everyone. And it's not the fact that it's a different person. I don't see it's a big deal. Right. Let's go on to our next question. And that is about a lefty. Does a lefty now? This is a sugi in Gemara Shabbos. Talks about putting on your shoes. Shabbos Daf Samach Aleph and Yochanan, etc. The Poilet says the advice: put on the shoe first on your right foot, then you put on your left shoe, then you tie the shoelaces on the left, and then you tie the shoelaces on the right. Why is that? Because when it comes to tying, there's something tefillin you tie on your left hand, your left arm, and therefore it comes to tying, you tie the left before the right. So there's a certain chashivas comes to tying, the left has got a chashivas. All right, well known. So here's the question: if a person is a lefty, should he tie his right shoe, which is his left? Should he tie that one first? So what you have on the screen is from a sefer called Dinei Iter from Lubavitch and Geman. Overall, quite a good sefer, pretty good. Now, he says something very interesting, which was news to me, and that's why this is part of the fun of having this share, of sharing things which I discovered during the week. So there's something called a left-handed person, and there's something called a left-legged person. Never was aware of that. He says a left-legged person should first put on the shoe on his left foot and then on his right foot. So how do you know who's left-legged? So he has in the beginning of the Sefer, he has klolim. And he says that can be seen when a person starts walking. Do you start walking with your right foot or do you start walking with your left foot? And so if you're generally would start moving with your left foot, it seems to be that you're left-legged. He doesn't talk about when kicking a football, whatever. He talks about beginning to walk. At any rate, so he's saying like this. So that's very interesting. So you might be a left-handed person, but as far as it comes to your legs, you could be a right-legged person. So if you're left-legged, then you put on your shoe first on the left leg and then on your right leg. Right. Now, then we go on to Sif, next Sif. Having put on your two shoes, the right one and then the left one, or if you're lefty, left leg, on the left one, then the right one, then comes to tying your shoelaces. So if you're a righty, you should tie the left laces first. That we all know. If you're a lefty, left-handed, then you should tie your right shoelaces first, because you put on tefillin on your right arm. Therefore, you should also do tying the shoelaces on the right side first. So these are two separate things. One is when it comes to putting on the shoes, that's got to do to left-legged or right-legged. When it comes to tying, he says that's got to do with your hands. If you're left-handed, then you should be tying your you should be tying your right shoelaces first. Right. Now, so far, what do you have on this sefer? Now he then has something else, which I want to make a fuss about. Now, first of all, does what about other types of garments besides shoes, which also have knots to tie? So the Alter Rebbe writes that if you have, let's say, a cloth kind of sock, so also and it ties, you should tie the left before the right. Or if you have other garments which you need to tie, you tie the left before the right. The Malbim was more known for his commentary on the Chumash, but he also wrote a sefer called Artzis Chaim, and he says no, it's only got to do with shoes, and if you tie other parts of your other garments, other things, you don't have to put the left first. The Alter Rebbe takes it's got to do with tying. So anything which is tied, there's two sides, you should tie the left before the right. Okay, so that's machlokas. Mishnah says like the Artzis Chaim. Okay, not another issue. But meanwhile, he says something very interesting. He says, what about if it's not a shoelace? Let's say it's avzam is the Hebrew word for a buckle, or scotch, which I found out of late that it means Velcro, not sellotape. So when it comes to you've got Velcro shoes or a buckle, do you have to buckle the first the left shoe and then buckle the right shoe, or is it only when it comes to tying? So he comes up and he says lav dafka shoelaces, but also other forms of securing, of tightening, should also be done first the left shoe foot and then the right foot. And then he goes further, even other begodim, which if you're tightening them, I find them very, very confusing. All this stuff is new to me. That anything which so he comes up with a new idea, which is not the only one. That it's lav davka tying. It's also if it is tightening. So you buckle a shoe is also a form of tying. And therefore, you should buckle your left shoe before your right shoe. So he's not the only one who says this, which according to the Alter Rebbe, has got to do with tying dafka, and the Alter Rebbe extends tying to other parts. It's dafka to tying, nothing to do with anybody. He's Lubavitch in Yaman, so whatever. But then he comes up with it. Where's his proof? He brings his proof from tying tefillin. When we put on tefillin shal yad, do you tie a knot when you put on tefillin? You're just tightening. It's a raya that tightening also comes under the gather of tying. Yeah? Since by the tefillin shal yad. Since by the tefillin shal yad, we only tighten. And there's a raya that's called kshira. So I once looked into, I've written about this, the following question. You go on Mivtzoim, and let's say you're lucky, you have a lot of people lining up, and you got one pair of shalrosh, one pair of tefillin. Some people have got small heads. Someone keeps on unmuting themselves. Please keep yourself muted. Yeah. So you've got this pair of tefillin, and the shalosh has got it's quite easy to adjust the size because it's one piece of strap going down and up again and down again. So how about I make it big size, and when it's a big head, then fits. When it's a small head, then I'll just pull the ritzua a bit, just the top piece, and it will fit. It's not, and I don't have to adjust the whole thing. I just pull the loop. Would that be a solution to be able to easily adjust the tefillin to the size of the head? And my maskana was that it's not okay. Let me go a little bit further. You have the difference between Ashkenaz and Sfard tefillin before Chabad, yeah, just Ashkenaz and Sfard. So in Ashkenaz, there's a loop hanging on the inside, and then you pull the Tzua, you do a U-turn, and then you pull it round and you wrap it around your arm inwards. Sfard, I've got the loop on the outside, and then you pull against the direction of the loop, and then you start rotating outwards. Now, let's say if I'm wearing, I'm happen to have Ashkenaz tefillin, and I want to wrap them, Sfard style, Chabad style. So then I start turning it around, and I've turned the Ritzua 3 times round the bias. It's going to stay in place, but I haven't pulled against the kesher. Am I Mekai mitzvah suksharta? So my understanding is you're not yotz. And the question is like this: there's a mitzvah of ksharta on lo'is al yodecho, and what you're doing, you're tightening. How you Mekai mitzvah suksharta? The mitzvah is that you have to use the kesher to secure it on your arm. That is the mitzvah of kshartam. You cannot make a new knot according to Tosfos, not like Rabbi Yoel Lunderish, who says you have to make a new knot every day. But even not, but you have to use the kesher to secure it on your arm. If you're going to wrap it with plenty of ritzua, but not with the kesher, you haven't done the mitzvah of kshartam. And the same thing with the shalosh. It has to be secured on your head by a kesher. If you do this kind of shtick of loosening the ritzua, it's not being secured on the head by a kesher, so you haven't done the mitzvah properly. And I'm most about shilya. So I disagree with his thing. Tefillin, when we put on tefillin, we're not just tightening. We are mekayim a mitzvah of ksharto. And therefore, don't bring a raya from there that every tightening is going to be the same as tying, and therefore buckles and zips and all that should all come into the same thing. And then he says further, he goes into other begadim also, a gartel. If so, what about your coat? Perhaps you should do the left side before the right side because you're tightening it. I don't know. The whole thing seems to be they lost the plot kind of thing. As I say, that Alter Rebbe says it's got to do with Shira very clearly. And if it's not a kasher, I think it's the right comes first. Okay. Right. Where are we holding? Oh, we have one. We have a couple of little points here. All right, this is from right. Now we got number 9, 10, and 11. So number 9. Here's a question. Since the union of tying your left shoelace first has got to do with tefillin, does it apply to a woman who doesn't tie tefillin? And so the Malachim say it does apply to a woman, but here I want to add to that. I actually gave a shir this past week talking about Birchas Hamazon, and this is in Sim Kuf Pesai. Very beautiful idea here. There are those who say that now when Chachomim instituted the Lashon of the Birchas Hamazon, there were 2 particular themes in the second bracha, bris and Torah. Al bris samta b'v'sareno, the covenant which has been sealed in our flesh, and the Torah which was given, which you've taught us. So there are those who want to say that women should have no reason to say bris samta b'v'sareno. They don't have a bris in their flesh, and for that matter, Torah, they don't have a chiyuv to learn Torah. The Achshov, despite those reservations, it's Nagu Loimer HaKoil, that women say it like men, no different. And let's read the Alter Rebbe's Lashon. Lefi she'ein od nikra odom elak sheyesh le'isha. A man is only called a man when he has a wife. As it says, Zochon Keva Brom, Hashem created the male and the female, Vayikro es Shmom Odom. Together they become Odom. Harei, Hazocha v'Hanekeva hem guf echad. So the male and female are seen as one entity, Odom. Lefichoch, therefore, Yechoilos Loimar al bris haschorim shechasamtu b'sarenu. Therefore, a woman can say shechasamtu b'sarenu because she, with her husband, is like guf echad, and he has a bris, and therefore she has a bris also. And the same thing, he's learning, so she's learning. And therefore it's shared, the bris and Torah of the husband is shared with the wife. And therefore it's legitimate. Then there's a Sikha that Rebbe spoke to girls, saying that all the mitzvahs, even before you're married, is also not just for you. You think it's just for yourself. You say, oh, for myself, I don't care. It doesn't bother me. No, you got to achrayz because you're going to have a chosen, and whatever the good deeds which you do now are going to be shared with him also. Therefore, you should be, I guess the same goes the other way around. For men to the boys to their mitzvahs will be shared with the women with their wives eventually. So even if you're single, when you have the mitzvahs which you're doing as shared, and separately there's an inyan of noshim have got. Um, a mitzvah to learn the halachas which are relevant to them, etc. But meanwhile, we have this very beautiful idea that the mitzvahs, if the man is wearing tefillin, so she is also wearing tefillin. By extension, she's wearing tefillin, and therefore therefore when it comes to tying the shoelaces, the same thing she would be putting on her tying the left before the right. Sounds a little bit al derech hadrush, but it's in Shulchan Aruch, yeah. Right. If you remember, was it last week, 2 weeks ago, we've been talking about how to do the knot. It was last week on the tefillin of a lefty, because the kesher will look like if it's just a mirror image, so then a yud in a mirror image, not a yud. That was the discussion we had last week. So what you have on the screen, someone sent it to me. There's a sofer. He sent it to me. There's after Zalman Shimon passed away, which is actually he passed away. I was in New York at the time. It's the first time I visited New York after I moved back to London. This was Purim, just after Purim Tov Mem Hey. And within Shloishim, they published a couple of pamphlets of psokim, which he had paskened in various inyonim, and there was a separate pamphlet just about Sofras. So this is from that. You can see Piska Dinim Hilchas Stam from Zalman Shimon, published posthumously. Chovtes, the yud of the kesher of the tefillin of a lefty should be done yosher and not hafucha. Now this is still a bit ambiguous. What does it mean straight and not not? Now hafucha can mean back to front or upside down. So that's why I asked, what is actually the Mesorah from the same Zalman Shimon? So it was that it should be a tzura of a yud, not a mirror yud, which is pretty much what I'd said last week. Right. Now, the last thing is, this is going to be a bit of fun. Baruch Hashem, we've got a couple of minutes to address this. If you remember, I put out a challenge for our American listeners, since we don't have any snow here. And the question was that we had read about packed snow, that when you want to use packed snow for Tevila, and I said, how can you tovel in packed snow? Because it says, this way it's written in Shulchan Aruch, Yemar Chaloloi. So the answer they wanted to say, it doesn't mean that you tovel in the packed snow, but you take packed snow and you put it into a mikveh, which was, let's say, short of the 40 sa'ah, and you put it in the packed snow, and then it raises the volume. So I was curious whether the volume of water from packed snow is going to be the same as that volume in water. So I asked someone, and Rabbi Gavriel Drukia, I hope he doesn't mind I mentioned his name. I'm sure he's not going to get too many requests of this nature. So he lives in New Haven, and he took this basin and he filled it up with snow. And you can see the upper picture, he filled it up with snow. And then he brought it into the house and it dissolved. I was told last week, I was reprimanded. Snow doesn't dissolve, it melts. Okay, so it melted and it became, you can't even see the line here, but it became water. And he says he worked it out, it was about 45%. He worked it out, he says, very scientific. So he worked it out both in weight and in volume. In one, it was 47%, and one, it was 44%. So if you take packed snow, I'm not talking about fluffy snow, packed snow, it's going to, when it melts, it's going to be less than 50% than its same volume in water. Yeah, so however, you understand what I'm talking about. So now, here's the question. How can I have a mikveh which is missing a sa'ah? And I'm told this before, the word sa'ah in French is a bucket, yeah? Anyone speaks French? Un seau is the word for a bucket. So it's just easy to remember. A seau is about a big bucket. So you got this 39 saw mikveh, missing one saw, and so you go outside and you take a bucket and pack it up with snow, pack it in, and then you dump it into the mikveh. And now, hey presto, it's kosher, yeah? It's got 40 saw. But you know what? Once that snow is going to dissolve, it's going to be less than the shear. So how's the mikveh kosher? Let's be more extreme. Let's say you took ice. Now, everyone knows, or almost everyone, anyone who's put a bottle of water into the freezer knows that ice is bigger than water. That's why the bottle cracked inside the freezer. So ice is bigger. So if I have a saw of ice and I put it into a mikveh and it's now become 40 saw, but when that saw of ice is going to dissolve, it's going to be less than the shear. So why does it make up a mikveh? This was the problem which I raised last week. And so I want to share with you a svara. Now this is a Mishnah in Uksin, which says the following: sponge pasufgonis, sfogonis, a bread which is spongy. Mishta eres b'kamois shehi. You want to talk about shiurim, kazayis, whatever? A spongy bread. Don't have to squeeze it. It's a kazayis, yeah. In yesh b'cholol, if it's got a significant hollow, then you have to squeeze it before measuring it. Irrelevant for Pesach, etc. So, and he says before about B'nai B'tzolim also. So we have here something very interesting. Everyone understands that a piece of cake, has got lots of air pores, but it doesn't matter. Those air pores are going to be part of the shear, and if you had a kazayis in volume, even though the part of the kazayis is air pores, that's still considered you've eaten a kazayis. You can make a brocha achrona, and one slice of bread in weight is a kazayis, let's say. But in volume, one slice of bread is probably more like 3 kazayis. And that's enough. Comes now Pesach. How much matzah do you have to eat to be able to make a brocha achrona? By the way, what about brocha achrona? What about making brocha on Tis Yadayim? You can't make on Tis Yadayim unless you have a shear of kabeya. A kabeya is a whole matzah. That means every time you want to wash the Tis Yadayim, you have to have a whole matzah. But you can go down a bit because we're talking on volume, we're not talking on weight. And the air pores count to the shear. All right. So therefore, this is my understanding of this phenomenon. The packed snow has got in it a lot of hollows. It's not as solid as water. It's not as dense as water. It doesn't matter. That the way it is, so long as it's in that form, it's going to be it's going to be measured the way it is. The fact that in change of circumstances, it's going to shrink to a smaller volume, so we'll deal with it then. But meanwhile, as it is now, it's mistaref to this year. That's what I wanted to share with you, and I hope you enjoyed this evening. And Agotovoch, we should be Ma'arbin B'Simcha, and Simchas Ha'Geula, Simchas Olam Al Rosham. Kol Tov.
Amen.